lecture, we have started a new topic that is known as our exception handling in Java, right? So in our exception handling in Java, so we have gone through the introduction part of what is an exception, what do you mean by exceptions, and when we are getting that particular exceptions. So till now, most all of you have faced some sort of exceptions while writing your code in either in your CodeZinger or either if you are using any other IDE, right? So till now, we after that we have discussed about default exceptional handler. So first of all, I just want to give you an overview again so that you will understand that what we are going to cover in our today's lecture. So we have started with the concept of exceptions. So always remember, exceptions are what our abnormal conditions. Okay. So suppose if you are working in some program and everything is working fine. So if you already know that we are having two modes, our compile time mode and your runtime mode. So during compile time, because in compile time we generally check for what our syntax error. So if syntax are fine, so it will say yes, everything is correct. While in the case of runtime, due to some one, every time it is working fine, but just because of one particular case, our program stops executing. And just because of that, we will get your runtime error. So this condition is known as what our exception. So in Java, exception is an event that disrupts the normal flow of the program. Okay, so we have gone through the types of errors and we have gone through the various examples. So I'm not revising these examples as well as concepts again and again. And then we have gone through about exception handling in Java. What do you mean by exception handling in Java? So if you are getting an exception, then what are you doing? Whether we are doing something or not. So till now, if you are working in your program, so till now you are not at all handling your exceptions. Okay. Then if you are not handling your exception, then who is basically handling our exception? Then we have our default exception handler. Okay. So in our Java programming language, we have a default exception handler which will handle our exceptions only in that particular case when we are not handling our exceptions. So I have given you this particular example. So using this example, you can see over there, like if in statement number 3, if I got some sort of your exception, then what will happen? Automatically, it will terminate our program. If we don't have any exceptional handling code, then what it will do? It will It will remove. It will just terminate our program abnormally. And just because of that, we are not able to execute our statement number 4, statement number 5, and statement number 6, and which we don't want. Then how do we basically sort out this problem? So that is why we always go for exceptional handling. But till now, we have no idea about what do you mean by exceptional handling, how to handle these such kind of exceptions and so on. So in today's lecture, we are going to learn about how can we handle these exceptions. But before that, what we already know that till now, if we are not handling our exception, then what will happen? Our default exception handler will work. And you already know that I have already discussed this entire algorithm, okay, or this entire process, that when our default exception handler will initiate, when our JVM will initiate this our exception default exception handler, right? Now, so in this program, can anyone tell me if I'm going to execute this code? Okay, so till now you already know about this, why we are getting an exception over there. So this exception is known as your arithmetic exception, and the exception is when you are writing 10 divided by 0. Okay, so you already know that 10 divided by 0, what we will get? We will get some we 10 divided by 0, like we cannot store it in our integer. Okay, so that is why it will throw us what arithmetic exception, and here it will display what the message, and here it will display at which location, at which stack trace you are getting an exception. So first of all, we are getting an exception at M2, so that is why it will display M2. Then after that, because M1 is the caller of is calling our M2 method, So automatically our JVM will say whether M1 is handling this exception. So no, M1 is again not handling this exception. So again it will display that again at M1 also we are getting that exception. Similarly main also, because main is the parent method, you can call it for this example. So that is why again main is not handling this exception. So that is why we will get an exception over here. So that is why this is known as our stack trace. This is basically our, let me show you this. This is our, first of all, our name of exception. That is our arithmetic exception, then description. So automatically this message is going to will be displayed by whom? Our default exception handler. And remember, if somebody is going to ask you whether this will be a normal termination or abnormal termination. So always in the case of default exceptional handler, we always got what your abnormal termination, right? Now, now let's take our one more example, and using this example, I hope that you will understand the concept of default exception handler very nicely. Now, now in this program, what I have done, this is known as my public static void main method, which is having my M1 method, which is having what my this statement. Okay, so let's check it out. So this is my stack. So you already know that first of all in my stack, my main method will come. Okay. Now after one, before executing this entire main statement, my main method is calling which method? My M1 method, right? So automatically now it will go here in this method. Now, now after this method, it will not execute this statement. First, it will wait for you to basically execute this particular method. So it will go directly here, and here you will get what? Your M1 method. Then here you have print university, so it will display what? University. So I'm talking about the runtime, okay? So there is a spelling mistake, make it as university. Now after that, what it will do? It is calling our M2 method. So automatically in our stack trace, we will get what? Our M2 method. Now inside our M2 method, what we are doing? We are printing the value of first your Greater Noida. We are printing the value what? Your Greater Noida. Now after that, what will happen here? In this statement, we got an exception, right? That is what your 10 divided by 0. Then what our compiler will do, or what our JVM will do? It will create an exception object, and this exception object will contain what? The name and the description. So here the name is what? The arithmetic exception, and the what message it will display? The message is like divided by 0, which we have already discussed earlier. Now in this case, it will get. Now our JVM will ask whether M2 method is basically handling this exception or not. So here it is not handling this exception. So that is why, see, our JVM will abnormally terminate this method. And here you can see directly that it will not execute this statement, because after this statement, it will check whether we are handling or not. So we are not handling. So that is why it will terminate this method abnormally. Now here again it will check whether M1 is handling this exception or not. So again M1 is again not handling this exception. So that is why again it will what? Terminate our this method, our M1 method. Now again in my public static void main, again it will check whether in my the public static void main is handling this exception or not. So yes, again it is not handling this exception. So here you can see over there again it will not execute this statement, because this statement is just after this statement. So that is the reason what will happen. It will terminate our main method what? Abnormally. And just before terminating our entire class, what it will do? Our JVM will handle this exception object to our default exception handler, because in our entire program we don't have any exception handling code. So that is the reason now we have a default exception handler, and it will display the message, the name of the our message, the description, and it will also display our entire spectrum, right? So let's see what will happen if we are going to execute this code. So here in this case, you can see we are getting what our university, right? Then after we are calling this method, so we are getting what your Greater Noida. But after this, you can see over there, we are not getting the output of this line, as well as your this line. Because in this line, we are getting an exception. So that is your runtime error. Okay. Remember, this is your runtime thing. So that is why you are getting an output. Otherwise, you will say that, sir, why it is displaying this output? Because everything, whatever the exception we are getting it, we are getting these exceptions during your runtime, right? So that is the reason what you are getting. It will also display the output, the statement till where your code is working fine. So that is why here you will get an exception, and the same exception you will see here, right? Like the name of this exception, the description, and where we are getting this exception, like in these, what is the stack trace, okay, where you are getting this particular exception. Now here in this case, can anyone tell me like what output statement it will display for this particular, for this question, for this example? What output I will get, whether it will display some statement message or not? Yes, you can post your answer in the chat box.
So
Just go through this program.
it will print all the information, and lastly there will be an exception error.
Okay, let's check it out. What about others? Whether you will get, it will display all the system.out.println statement or it will not. Let's check it out.
So it will, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's great. So it means that now you know that what will happen if you are getting these such kind of exceptions. Okay, so you here in this scenario, you can see that it will first display our what your, okay, I have cropped that particular, okay, yeah, so it's correct. So first of all, it will call this method. Okay, so that is why you will get university, then Greater Noida, right? Then first it will execute this statement, then it will, you are calling this method, so it will call this your Greater Noida, then you will get India, then after you will get what your Bennett. But after that, what you are getting an exception over there. So now whenever in any program, whenever you are getting some exception, okay, so how you are going to find it out whether it is an exception or not? So during, first of all, it will come during runtime. So we will also find out. So it's not like that. Exceptions are again categorized into two categories. Okay. So we are going to discuss about this part also. But still, if you are getting these such kind of messages, na, so try to understand what this message is basically telling us. So here you can see directly one difference. Entire thing is same like in our previous example, but here if you will see over there our stack trace. So in our stack trace, we are getting an exception only in this method. Okay, so that is why here you are not getting M1 M2, because M1 and M2 are working fine. Okay, so there are no errors in our M1 method as well as in our M2 method, but we are getting an exception in our main method, and this method is not handling what our exception. So that is the reason we in our stack trace we are getting only this method. Got the point? Yes. Now always note these 2 points, that if at least one method terminates abnormally, then the termination of a program is abnormal. So if you cannot say, even though you can say that yeah, everything is working fine, like this method is fine, this is method, but here you can see over there, just because of this thing we are getting an exception. So if somebody is going to ask you whether it is a normal termination or it is an abnormal termination of your program, so here you are getting an abnormal termination of your program. Now the question that comes into your mind is, then how can we make this termination normal? Because every time we will get an abnormal condition whenever we are getting these such kind of statement, whenever we are going to write in our program. So that is why if we are not satisfied, remember, if we are not satisfied with our default exceptional handler, then we will always go for customized exception handling. It means you create your own exception handling code. you will write your own exception handling code. If you are not satisfied with default, and yes, we are not at all satisfied with default exception handler. Why? Because just because of this our default exception handler, we are getting what abnormal termination. And we always want that whatever the application we are creating, we want that the termination should be normal every time, not for one case, but for every time whenever we are getting that particular case right now. So basically this is, yes, any question?
Sir, if we have created a method which has an exception, but we have not called it inside the main method, so will we get an exception
No, in that scenario we will not get any exception.
okay, sir.
Got it? So suppose, yeah, your question is suppose like here in this case, right? So yeah, here. So suppose if we haven't called this method now, this method. So according to our program, what we are doing, we are just calling these two methods. Now suppose we are not, we have missed this statement, right? So in that statement, what will happen? Our M1 will call this method. Now everything is working fine. So during runtime, no issue at all, right? Because M1 is calling this method and this method will return, and we are going to terminate our program successfully. But exception, that is why we call it as exception. So whenever you are creating some sort of many, you can say that methods, and suppose for one particular case you are getting some sort of exception, because here you can see also that all the statements are fine, but just because of this statement, right now I have directly written 10 divided by 0, but what if you are performing some sort of computation divided by c by d, and c is having a very long computation, similarly d is also having some long computation, but sometimes it might be possible that for some values you are getting the value of d as what your 0, then only that particular case you will get that particular exception. But you have to basically consider these such kind of cases, because in reality you will say that okay, we will never get the value of c by d, means the value of d as 0. But what if you will get some case? Okay, you have two option: either avoid that particular case, either handle our exception. Either you will make some condition like if the value of d is 0, then leave it like that. Okay, otherwise what you do, if you are not writing those such kind of conditions, then it's better to write what some sort of your exception handling, right? So we should go for customized exception handling, and with this thing which we are going to learn. Okay, now this is basically the hierarchy of your Java exception class. So in Java they have already created what our exception class is. Okay, so they already know about, okay, these are the exceptions that might come. So already, because if you already know that okay, whenever you are basically attending any lecture, okay, so these your power might cut. Okay, so what you are doing, so you have a battery backup, so your Wi-Fi might stop working, so that now you prepared with your what, mobile data. So all these things are what, your exceptions. So you are already aware about these exceptions. Similarly, Java, your Java language designer, they already know about that. Okay, these things might occur. Okay, these exceptions might occur. So that is the reason why they have done. They have created a separate class for exception, and the name of this class is what we call it as your Java exception classes. Always remember that the parent class of all the classes in our Java programming language is our object class. Don't get confused with object, what we are creating inside our classes. Okay, don't get confused. So there is a separate class named as object class, and this is the super class of all the class. You can call it as a parent class, okay, of our of all the classes that are there in our Java programming language. But similarly, this throwable class, so throwable class is inheriting the feature of our this object class, and this inside in our throwable class, all exception and errors are represented. Remember, all errors. So if somebody is going to ask you like in which class all errors and exceptions are represented, then your answer would be what, your throwable class. So here your classes are again divided into two subclasses. So these two are what again subclasses. First one is your exception class. Second one is your error class. Okay. So remember. So I will tell you. So till now, some of you might have some doubt related to like what is the difference between exception and error. So we are not talking about right now compile time error. Okay, we are talking about runtime everything. Like what is the difference between runtime exception and runtime error? Right? I will tell you about this thing. So your exceptions are again being categorized into IO exception, SQL. So you already know about structure query language. IO is your input output exception, right? Similarly, you have one more class which is inheriting your exception class, that is known as what is your runtime exception. And in runtime exception, you have arithmetic. So these are not limited. There are many classes. Okay. But if you will focus on majorly that you have two classes. First one is your exception class and second one is your error class. Now, so always remember, if somebody is going to ask you like which class contains all errors and all exception, okay, we are talking about all errors and exception, then your answer will be what your throwable class. Now let's check it out and find out what is the difference between exception and what is the difference between error. Because see, this is a very important question because they might ask you in any interview or in any competition like, okay, what is the difference between runtime exception? Exceptions are always runtime. And what is the difference between runtime error? Make it runtime, okay? We are not talking about compile time error. So in most of the programs, what kind of error you are getting it? You are getting compile time error, right? So compile time errors are what? Like your syntax error, like you forget to write like cap class you are writing and C is in your uppercase, like so these are what your syntactical errors. No. So most of the time exceptions are caused by programs, okay, and are recoverable. Remember, so whenever we are writing our programs now, so most of the times remember this point that the programs which are causing these exceptions are recoverable, means you can recover those exceptions. So how can you recover these exceptions? So either you will write some exceptional handling code. So if you want to handle these error exceptions, so you can recover it. How you can recover it? By writing exceptional handling code. So right now I haven't told you what exceptional handling code. So don't get confused. We are going to discuss it. But you should know that there is something like exceptional handling code with via which we are able to recover our exception. But remember, like most of the time, the errors are not caused by program. Okay, so here we are causing because of the syntax, like here in this case we have written not 10 divided by 0, so that is why we are getting this exception over there. So inside our program we are getting an exception over here. But similarly in our errors, like we are not saying that every time, like but in most of the times errors are not caused by our program, and there are due to system resources. Right now this thing is related to what our system resources, and errors are, remember, are irrecoverable, means you cannot recover, means from a programmer point of view. Remember, I'm talking about from a programmer point of view that you cannot recover your errors. So I will tell you via one example. Okay, so this is an example of our error and this is an example of our exception. So in error example, what we are doing in our class main, we have a public static void main method, which is calling what our recursive method. This method it is calling, right? And the name of this method is what? Recursive method. And we have already created one static method named as what? Your recursive method. Now let's create one stack for this method. So initially you already know that in our stack trace what will happen? First main will come, right? Now after that what you are doing? You are calling this method. So the value of I is what? 10. The value of I is what? 10, because we are passing an argument value as what? Your 10. Now here we are checking one condition, and this condition, so here automatically because we are calling that condition, so it will come what? Recursive over there. I'm just writing recursive, okay? Recursive method. I'm just writing recursive M over there. Now after that, what we are doing, we are checking the condition whether 10 is not equal to 0. So the condition is true because 10 is not equal to 0. So it will go inside this loop, and see here we have made one mistake. Instead of decrementing the value, we have incremented the value. Now the value of I will become what? 11. And now it will again call one more. So we are calling recursively. Recursive means method calling itself is known as your recursive. Now this method is calling itself here. So that is why. But now again, what will happen in your stack trace? You will get what? Your recursive method. Now again it will check the condition, but here instead of decrementing we have incremented. So that is why, as you already know, that it will never terminate over this infinite this loop. So it means that you will get what kind of loop? Infinite loop. Okay, but you, as you can see over there, the infinite loop is not an error. It is not an error, as well as it is not an exception. But here you can see here we are getting an exception. We are getting an error. You can call it exception. We generally write it down as exception, but these are not exception. These are basically your runtime errors. So how can you say that this is here we will get an error? Because in our computer we have stack. Okay, so stack is what? Nothing but it is a memory. So Java will also allocate some memory for their stack. Okay, so let's assume it's 1 KB. I'm just giving you one example. Okay, so as you can, or you can say that it can accommodate at a time 100 methods only. So this stack can accommodate only 100 methods only. But you can see here that this is an infinite loop. So it might be possible that it might here you will find how many methods. Here you might get like 1,000, 1 lakh, or anything like that. Okay, whatever the range of our int is. But here just before 101, what will happen? Because now our stack is full, sorry. So that is why we will get an exception in thread main, and the error which we will get over there is what? Your stack overflow error. So remember why we are calling this thing as error, because this error we are not getting. So this error is not there in our program, but this error is basically related to our memory. Okay, this is related to our hardware. So that is the reason you are getting an error over there. So can you handle it? Suppose for not for this case, suppose your stack can accommodate only 100 methods, but your program you want you are calling 102 methods. Okay, only 102 methods. Cool. Just leave about infinite loop. So just because of this stack we are not able to proceed. So can we solve this? Can a programmer solve this issue? No, a programmer cannot solve this issue. Otherwise we have to make some changes in our method, but because this is a hardware thing, so a programmer cannot do this thing. So that is why these are known as your errors. While here in this case, like in most of the program we are just discussing about divided by 0. So you can see directly here you are getting an exception in this line. So here you can see over there exception in thread main, and here you can see arithmetic exception. See java.lang arithmetic exception, right? So this is a separate class. In lang class we have which class? Your arithmetic exception class. And here this error we are getting from which class? java.lang.stack overflow error. Here we have used the term error. Here we have used the term exception, right? And here the first exception means during runtime we are getting. Remember this point, right? So this is the difference between error and exception. Exceptions are recoverable and your errors are irrecoverable because they are majorly related to our, you can call it as your hardwares and all those things, right? Now in our exception, because now this topic is somehow confused, you will get confused. Okay, so just listen this basically topic very carefully. Okay, because right now what I have told you, like exception you will get during runtime. You will get during runtime. But in Java, what they have done, the Java language designer, they have categorized again exception into two categories. First exceptions are known as your checked exception, and second category known as your unchecked exception. Okay, where error is considered as your unchecked exception. So always remember, whatever the error we are getting na, like your Stack Overflow, all these things are comes under our unchecked exception. Errors comes under the category of our unchecked exception. Now the Sun Microsystem says that there are three types of exceptions. So it depends upon different your condition. First one is your checked exception. Second one is your unchecked exception, and third one is your error, right? And remember, this is a very important thing, but because I have seen, like, after when we are going to discuss about now your checked exception and unchecked exception, some of you might say that whether we are getting an exception during compile time or not. So remember this point and mark this statement that all exceptions occur at your runtime. Remember this point. Okay, this point is very important. Now, first type of exception we are going to discuss about, and that is what our checked exception. So what do you mean by checked exception? So the exception checked by the compiler for the smooth execution of the program during runtime. See, if somebody is going to ask you, you already know that you are getting compile time error and your runtime error. So if somebody is going to ask you like what kind of error, okay, like whether compile time error is better or runtime error is better. So always remember where errors are not at all good for us, but still if you have an option, okay, so always go for compile time error. So compile time errors are better than your runtime error, because see, if you have a product and you are basically you want to deliver that product and you know that okay, these are the errors you are getting during run compile time, and if you are able to sort out all those errors, then it is great. Okay, but if your client is basically using your product and somehow in between he or she got some sort of exception in that particular scenario, then it might create a lot of issue. It might crash that particular application and so on like that. So we never want these such kind of errors. That is known as your runtime error. That is why in order to make everything should come during your compile time, what they have done, they have make some of your exceptions, okay, like Java programmer, Java language designer, what they have done, because these such types of exceptions might occur, so they have made that now it is mandatory for you. If you are writing these statements, then it is mandatory for you to write some Java exceptional handling code. If you are not writing exceptional handling code, I will give you a compile time error. Even though you are not getting any compilation error, remember, but that error is basically related to like they are our compiler is alerting us, okay, these are the errors that might exceptions that might occur. So I am alerting you during your compilation time. Remember this point. So the class that extends throwable class except, so see, in checked exception, what types of exceptions that comes under the category of checked exception? So checked exception always comes during your compilation time. But remember, those exceptions are basically somehow you can say that your futuristic kind of errors that might occur. So I will give you one example. So using that example, you will understand, right? Now, now in this example, what we are doing, we are importing java.io. IO is basically used for this class is used for what? If you or this package is basically used if you want to read or write some your files like that. Okay. So here in this program, you can see what we are doing. We are creating an object of your file reader. So file reader is a class that is there in our IO package. Okay, and in this class we are reading one file cbanet a dot. Okay, so we are reading this file and somehow we are performing log file input, and whatever the lines we have, we are basically reading these files. Now if somebody is going to ask you, if we are going to execute this code, whether this code will give any syntactical error or not. So you will say that no, we will not get any syntactical error. So hence there will be no compile time error, right? No compile time error. But like in one of our initial examples, I told you, what if this file is not there, then in this location, somehow if we have deleted this file, then what will happen? You will get a runtime exception. Okay, in that scenario you will get a runtime exception. But let's assume right now you are not getting either a runtime exception or either a compile time error. But still in Java, what they have done, whenever you are writing these such kind of exceptions, whenever you are writing these such kind of statement, so our compiler will tell, because that it might be possible that this file might get deleted and you will get compile time error. So it is mandatory for you to write it exceptional handling code. What exceptional handling code you have to write? So that if this file is not there, then what you have to do, then how we can proceed with this particular program. So always remember, checked exceptions are checked at your compile time, but they are basically focusing upon your runtime exception. That is why don't get confused with your compile time error and all like that. Okay, so here you can see over there, see what compile time error I will get if I'm going to execute compile this code. See, exception in thread main java.lang.runtime and uncompilable source code. Okay, so here we are getting what? Uncompilable source code, and they will say that reported exception java.io file not found exception must be called or declared. Okay, so I think this is some other one. Okay, this one is related to some other one. So you will get this one exception. Which one? Your java.io file not found exception must be caught or declared to be thrown. So we are going to discuss about throw, catch, try, catch, and all those things. No issue at all. But remember that now they have made it, because according to them also, because they also want that whatever the error you are getting, your error should come during compilation time. So that is why they have also make your runtime exceptions in under the category of what your compilation time. But remember, this is also known as this thing is also known as what we call it as your checked exception, and it will always come at your compile time. And this checked exceptions are basically handling what, or are dealing with what, your exceptions only that might come during your runtime. So remember that it under the category of your checked exceptions, except your runtime exception or errors. Okay, so here in this scenario, see, except your this error and your runtime exceptions, all other exceptions come are basically what we call it as your checked exception. So if somebody is going to ask you like whether IO exception is checked exception or unchecked exception, so you will say checked exception. Similarly, SQL, you will say checked exception. If somebody is going to ask you a virtual memory error or stack overflow, you will call it as unchecked exception. So your unchecked exceptions are either runtime exceptions or your error exception. Remember, okay, like this. Now we have second category of error. These exceptions are known as your unchecked exceptions. So why they haven't incorporated these exceptions during compilation time? Because we always performed these exceptions or these statements, whatever the statement where we are getting during our runtime. Okay, so during compilation time we cannot perform each and everything, right? So the classes that extend your runtime exceptions are known as your unchecked exceptions. So these such kind of exceptions you will always get during runtime, not during your compile time, remember. But other errors like when you are IO exception as well as your SQL exceptions, right? All these exceptions you will get when you will get during your compilation time. Now, Now, arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, array out of bound exception, etc. All these exceptions comes under the category of our unchecked exception. So these include programming bugs, some logical errors, and improper use of an API, right? Runtime exceptions are ignored at the time of compilation. This statement is very important. So that is the only difference between checked exception and your unchecked exception. Like checked exception always checked during your compilation time, and unchecked exceptions are no, we cannot check during your compile time. So that is why we call it as what we call as your unchecked exception, right? Now in this example, why this is an unchecked exception? Because see, during runtime we are basically checking the value of 5. Okay, we are not reading any file, we don't know. So all these operations are going to be performed during runtime. And here what we are doing, the size of an array is what? 4. But here we are checking which condition, which place we want to print. We want to print your 5th location. So that is why whenever you are going to execute this code, so you will get an exception, and the exception comes under the class of array index out of bound exception, right? At your position 5. So this is the description. So right now we are not writing any default handling code. Okay, so we are not writing, sorry, your exception handling code. So automatically our default handler, Java exception handler, will display us whatever this output we are getting, or whatever the exception we are getting it. Okay, so that is why exception in thread main index out of bound is equals to 5. So because during runtime, because during compilation time, so our compiler will never check whether you are writing 4, 5 like that. Okay, it will only check whether it is a data type, whether we are getting the same data type or not. Here we are getting int. It will never check, okay, whether you are writing 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. It will only check the range, whether this 5 comes under the range of integer or not. Yes, it comes under the range of integer. So it will not check these whether it is meeting the size of an array or not. It will never check that thing. So during runtime, these such kind of errors, if you will get, or exceptions you will get, so it comes under the category of your unchecked your exception. Now third one is our our errors. So you already know that these errors, so like out of memory error, these are basically related to our hardware errors, okay, which we basically cannot sort it out by our own. Now using these using this table, you will understand what is the difference between checked exception and your unchecked exception. So checked exceptions occur at your compile time, and unchecked exceptions occur at our runtime. Okay, and compiler checks a checked your exception. So compiler does not check your these types of your exceptions. Then these types of exceptions can be handled at the time of compilation. So I'm again rewriting the same statement. So the main important term which you should know is related at your runtime, compile time, and here we are getting during your compile time. But both of them are basically doing what? They are basically showing us the error or displaying the error. They are displaying error during compilation time. They are displaying error during runtime. Okay, like this. So here JVM needs the exception to catch and handle. So here remember, it will always tell us, because compiler always suggests something. So it will tell, okay, if you want to compile this code successfully, then you have to write customized exception handler code. If you are not writing customized exception handling code, then what will happen? I am not going to I will not allow you to proceed for what your runtime. Okay, like that. So these are the errors like file not found, no such a 5-field exception. So all these are what our checked exceptions. So remember, all your runtime exceptions. Okay, so whatever the runtime thing or whatever the errors you might get, all things comes under the category of what your unchecked exception. Okay, now, so the common scenario where exceptions may occur. So I'm just going to discuss it where you might get an exception. So I'm just going to discuss about the common scenarios. So let's take our first scenario. Now, So if we divide any number by 0, then always it will occur what kind of exception? Our arithmetic exception. Okay, so like 50 divided by 0. So here you will get an exception, and this exception known as what? Your arithmetic exception. Second exception known as your null pointer exception, where you can see over there string s is equals to null. So you already know that the default value of string s is what? Your null. And here if we are basically, if we want to execute this statement which is basically printing or returning the value of the length of our this string s, then what will happen in that scenario? You will get what? Your null pointer exception. So if we have null value in any variable and performing any operation by the variable occurs and your null pointer exception. Similarly, your number format exception. So you can see over there the wrong format of any value may occur your normal number format exception. So suppose I have a string variable that have characters and converting this variable into digit. Okay, so here see what you are doing. You have a string and you are converting it into integer. So can you convert it? No, you cannot convert any string into number. Okay, so that is why you will get an exception that is known as what? Your number format exception. Like and one more exception. So there are many other exceptions also, but I'm just giving you some examples, like array index out of bound exception, which will give us like this, like a of 5, and but we are accessing a of 10, so it will give us array index out of bound. We cannot access this thing now. Now the question is, till now what we have learned so far, what is an exception, what is default exception handling code, how many types of exceptions are there, checked exception, unchecked exception, right? Now, but till now we have not discussed about how we are going to handle these exceptions. So we are getting an exceptions, but still we are not handling it. Our default exception handler is basically handling all those exceptions during runtime, and either for checked exception our compiler is handling those exceptions. And how we are basically sort out our checked exceptions, because whenever you are getting this thing now, for this code you will never able to proceed this code. Why? Because you have to handle this exception. So how can we handle this exception by our own? So for that, what we are going to do, we are going to learn our Java exceptions handling in keywords. Okay, so these 5 keywords now we are going to learn, and using these 5 keywords what we are going to achieve, we are going to perform our Java exception handling. Remember this thing. Okay, so now till now we have an idea about what do you mean by exception, what is your exception handling, what is your default exception handler. Now we are creating our own Java exception handling code. Okay, we are writing our own code. So first one is our try block. So all these are what comes under the category of customized exceptional handling code. Okay, so always remember, so how can we handle our exceptional handling code? Using try and catch. So first of all, we should know what do you mean by try. So this try, remember, this is also a keyword. So whenever we are talking about telling you about anything about your keyword, so all should be in your lowercase, right? So try block. So what do you mean by try and catch? Let's go for it. And after that, I'm going to end this session. Just I'm going to cover our try and catch right now. So what do you mean by try block? So Java try block is used to enclose the code that might throw an exception. So whatever the statement where you have some doubt or your compiler is telling you, okay, like in this statement you might get or throw an exception. So whatever the statement you are exceptions you might get for that particular, what we call it as your exception. So always remember that particular exception we always write inside our try block. So how can we write it? We just write it down try, and whatever the exception we have now, like here in this case, what I will do for this case, because here we are getting an exception and our compiler is saying that okay, either write some customized exceptional handling code, otherwise I will not give you the permission, okay, that you should go for your runtime like that. So in that scenario, what you will do, you will write try over there and you will put inside your these two curly braces. Now it means that in this statement we might get an exception. So whatever the statement where you have a doubt, okay, that the place where you might get an exception, so you have to put inside your try block. Now Java try block must be followed by either catch and finally block. Remember, this point is very important. It's not like that. So you have try, catch and finally. So I'm not talking about finally block right now, but I'm talking about whenever you are writing try block now. So remember, every try block, your each try block should be followed by either your catch block or your finally block. So right now we are just talking about try and catch. So that is why I just focus upon your find. So if you are writing just try na, then in that scenario you will get an error. So it is mandatory for you to write some catch statement. Now what is your catch statement? I will tell you. So see, this is the syntax. So this keyword you have to write the statement where you are facing. So just put those statements inside these two curly braces and then you will write some catch statement, or either you will write what you're finally. If you are not writing this statement or this statement, then you will get an error. Remember this thing, right? Now let's check it out. What do you mean by catch block? Because we know that in try block, we are writing, okay, the block where we might get some sort of exception, we are putting inside our try block. Then what should we do in your catch block? So in catch block, generally we handle the exception. So if in exam, if somebody is going to ask you whether try block will handle the exception or catch block will handle the exception, so your answer will be your catch block will handle the exception. Try block will tell us like in which statement you will get an exception, and catch block will tell, okay, in how do we handle that particular exception. And remember that it must be followed after try block. It's not like that in a program you just write catch block. So remember that in your program you must have a try block that should be followed by your catch block. It's not like that first you will write catch block and then you will write try block. So the order will be first you will write try block and then you will write catch block. It is mandatory. And remember, this point is again very important, that you can use multiple catch block with a single try. Means if you are writing one try block, then you can, for this particular try block, you can write multiple catch block. So it is valid in Java. And I will give you some scenarios, some examples. You will, using those examples, you will understand, okay, we can go for multiple catch blocks. Now, this is the last example. After that, I am going to end our today's lecture. Okay. So can anyone tell me if I'm going to execute this code, what output I will get? Yes. You can unmute your mic directly if anyone is having any answer for this particular program. Yes.
Bennett, arithmetic error.
Yeah. So till now you already, so that is why I am giving you only one this kind of error, like our exceptional error arithmetic, so that now you have an idea. So it will execute this statement and this exception you are getting. So this is the output you are getting, Bennett, and then you are getting this your exception, right? But right now we are not handling our exception. So how can we handle our exception? How? So using our try and catch block, how can we handle it? So can anyone tell me in which statement we are getting an exception? In this statement, right? So in this statement, we are getting an exception. So the statement where you have a doubt or where you know that, okay, you might get an exception over there. So always put that statement inside your try block, right? So now I have basically put it inside my try block. See, how can I use it? See, I have put this try block, this statement inside this block, and I will tell you about this catch block. So in tomorrow lecture, I will tell you about what we are doing here. So we are basically handling this exception, and inside our catch block, what we are writing system.out.println 0 over there, and then we are writing university. Now what will happen, I will tell you. Right now, once our code will start executing, you know that we will get what Bennett over there. Now inside try block, what we are getting? We are getting arithmetic exception. What we are getting? Arithmetic exception. So it will create an object of arithmetic exception, and our JVM will ask whether our main method is handling this exception or not. So our main method will say yes, we are handling this exception. So where you are handling your arithmetic exception, see here we are writing the arithmetic exception. So here we are handling our arithmetic exception. So how you are handling this exception? So in this scenario, we are just printing this statement to 0, right? So if you are getting any divided by 0, if you are getting arithmetic exception divided by 0, so the statement which it will print is this statement, right? So the output which you will get over there is what Bennett 0, and it will give you what your university, right? So now can we solve the problem? So are we terminating our program abnormal or normal? We are terminating our program normally, not abnormally. See, now all the statements are executable, gets executed successfully. That is the reason, and that is how basically we can go for your this thing. So you can see directly that we will get the output Bennett 0 university. And generally we call these such kind of codes, okay, named as your risky code, the code which might give us what, some exception. So the code which may rise an exception is called as your risky code, and we have to define that code inside your try block. Remember, whatever the risky code, whatever the risky statement you are feeling now, okay, it might be possible that this statement might be risky. So always try to put that particular statement inside your try block. Then correspondingly handling the code, we have to define inside our catch block. So in our tomorrow's lecture, what we are going to do, we are going to discuss about try and catch block. I hope now you have an idea about what do you mean by exception, what is your exception handling, what is default exception handler, what is your checked exception, what is your unchecked exception, what are your runtime errors, and what is your try and catch block. And in tomorrow's lecture, we will go through and we will try to solve multiple questions related on multiple cases related to your try and catch block. So this is all about our today's class. So yes, is there anyone who is having any doubt, you can feel free to ask. Yes, anyone is having any doubt? Whenever you are facing any difficulty, if you are having